Destiny of a Savior by Famous Fault. Chapter 3. Opening Speech. They found an empty compartment at last after making their way through hordes of staring students. Hermione and Ron were on prefect duty, but all by all, Harry didn't mind finding a compartment with Luna and Neville. They were better company than most of the Hogwarts students could ever dream of being. At least they treated him as a human.
"They are even staring at us,"
Neville said, sounding pretty blown away.
"because we're with you."
Harry hoisted his trunk into the luggage rack as he shook his head. "They're staring at you because you were at the Ministry too. Our little adventure there was all over the Daily Prophet. You must have seen it."
"Yes. Did it only occur to me that the Daily Prophet didn't mention Professor Muto's part in it at all?"
Neville asked.
Luna shook her head. "Of course they wouldn't mention him. There are fishy things going on in the Spirit Division. They don't want anyone to know about it."
Neville and Harry just stared at her before meeting each other's gaze.
"I don't think that's it,"
Neville said, bravely opposing Luna.
"I think they don't want to admit that they were wrong about the spirit possessing Professor Muto. I think they were protecting their reputation, and like this, no one can question their actions."
Harry agreed with Neville. He also thought that to be a more likely reason than fishy business in the Spirit Division. He'd have to ask Dean or Tracy. They had been there. Though, hadn't Professor Muto asked Fudge what would happen if their methods were known? He didn't really remember.
"Everyone knows that Professor Muto was there anyway, even though the Prophet doesn't mention him. Lucius Malfoy has been raving about him and his spirit during his trails, and it was all over school last year. Malfoy probably..."
Malfoy said. Harry shook his head. Millicent Bagnon, according to Tracy. Her father works in the Spirit Division. He let it slip that the puzzle had been stolen by Professor Muto, and Bagnon spread it over the entire school. Neville made a displeased noise, then shook his head.
"Well, at least Gran was really pleased with the publicity, since I'm finally living up to my dad. She bought me a new wand."
Neville proudly pulled it out to show them.
"Probably the last Ollivander ever sold. He disappeared the next day."
Neville forgot all about his wand and instead went after his toad, who had jumped in onto the seat.
"Are we still doing DA meetings this year, Harry?"
Luna asked. She was detaching a pair of odd spectacles from the middle of the quibbler. "No point, now that we've got rid of Umbridge, is there?" Harry replied as he sat down and Neville emerged from under the seat.
"I liked the DA. I learned loads from you."
He sounded utterly disappointed.
"I enjoyed the meetings too. It was like having friends,"
Luna said, giving birth to an awkward silence. Before either Harry nor Neville could say anything, tumult could be heard just outside their door. "You ask him!" "No, you! I'll do it!" It was a group of girls giggling together at the other side of the class. One of them finally pushed her way through the door and boldly said, "Hi, Harry, I'm Romilda Vane," she said loudly and with great confidence. "Why don't you join us in our compartment? You don't have to sit with them." She sounded condescending, almost disgusted, as she threw Neville and Luna a look. Harry didn't like her tone and replied coldly, "They're friends of mine." The girl, named Romilda Vane, looked very surprised. "Oh," she said, not having expected that reply. "Oh, okay." She left almost embarrassed and closed the door behind her.
"People expect you to have cooler friends than us,"
Luna said, once again embarrassingly honest. "You are cool," Harry said, but before he could say anything more, once again voices were heard from the hallway outside the compartments. "Can we sit here?" A relatively high male voice with an implacable accent said, indicating it was either a first or second year. Romilda's voice gave a harsh reply. "As if we'd sit with a pair of first years like you." Then the door slammed. Neville, Harry, and Luna exchanged looks.
"The students are getting meaner for every year,"
Neville sighed. The two who had been turned down so harshly did, however, not seem to care. "Do you think it's because we are first years, or because there is something wrong with us that they chase us away every time we ask if we can sit anywhere?" "It must be since we are first years," the second voice said. It was only slightly darker than the first, but it clearly indicated that its owner came from London. "Regardless, if we don't find a compartment soon, we'll have to sit out here on the floor," the first boy laughed. He did not receive a reply. Instead, someone knocked on the door to their compartment as it opened.
"Excuse us,"
a boy, looking hardly older than 7, said.
"Can we sit here? Everywhere else is full."
Harry had expected them to look up in awe when they saw him sitting there and stumble out, but they didn't even react on his presence more than on that of Luna and Neville. Luna looked up from the quibbler just for a moment, then returned her gaze to the magazine. Neville and Harry just exchanged a confused glance. "Sure," the two said simultaneously. Luna moved herself further towards the window so that the two first years could sit down next to her.
I'm Ants!
Said the short one and held out a hand first to Neville and then to Harry and Luna.
Ants?
Neville asked, skeptical.
Well, that's not my real name. My real name is horrible, so everyone calls me Ants.
Anne explained, and Harry had to admire him for his courage, and he enjoyed the fact that neither seemed to know who he was. I'm Cole Clancy, the other one said, and it was obvious that his self-confidence wasn't as great as Anne's. He too held out a hand to the three of them.
And the monster on his shoulder is Jun,
and added with a theatrical shudder.
The cat isn't. Cole glared at Ants.
Jun is not a monster. Why does everyone keep saying that?
Neville Longbottom,
Neville said as he took the boy's hand, ignoring their mutual quarrel. Harry Potter, Harry said, curious if the boys would react on his name. Once again, nothing. Luna Lovegood, Luna said without even looking away from the quibbler.
How long have you two been looking for a compartment?
Neville asked.
They can't all have been taken.
Ash nodded fiercely.
They were all taken. Nearly always by someone sitting alone or just two people. We've been chased away everywhere. They really are getting meaner every year,
Neville said, repeating his former statement. Ron says they're just getting smaller every year. Harry joked slightly half-hearted. Aunt looked offended, but Cole laughed, almost making the cat fall off his shoulders. She jumped down affronted and instead curled up next to Cole lazily. You're Muggle-borns, aren't you? Harry asked before he could help himself. The question must have seemed really odd. Perhaps if he wanted to confirm that they were lesser, but simply wanted to know if that was the reason for their lack of reaction to him. Aunt and Cole didn't seem to think too much about it and simply nodded. Wonderful when Mum found out, Aunt said. I didn't know if she was going to cry in relief or faint. Which teachers came to pick you up? Harry asked out of curiosity and to lead them away from his previous question, of which the stupidity grew in Harry's head. Madame Hooch, Cole answered. The flying instructor. Harry and Neville exchanged a look. No one had expected the flying instructor to come back, but then again, it had been Umbridge who threw her out, so it was only natural that with Dumbledore reinstated, Madame Hooch would return.
Nice to know that she is back,
Neville said, thinking back at his first flying lesson with a grim expression. It hadn't exactly ended well. Has she been gone? Cole asked curiously. Neville nodded.
Last year was a bit horrible, he said, not knowing how else to put it. But Dumbledore is back, so it should be loads better.
And so was Voldemort, but Harry didn't say that out loud. The boys could at least have a peaceful ride to Hogwarts. Someone would tell them the truth soon anyway. What about you? He asked the shorter one. Professor McGonagall, Aunt said. She's very strict. Professor McGonagall is strict, but she has a lot of good sides. Harry said. One just has to get to know her first. Just don't be late. Once Ron and I were late, and she suggested she should change one of us into a watch, so that at least one of us would be on time. She can do that? Cole asked, wide-eyed. The combination of horror and fascination in his voice was enough for June to open a single eye, but then decided nothing interesting was going on, and she closed her eye again.
Transfiguration is highly forbidden on students,
Neville assured them, and both he and Harry were thinking about the moment when the fake Moony had turned Malfoy into a white ferret. So how do you know each other? Harry asked, enjoying having a conversation with someone who had no idea who he was. Aunt and Cole looked at each other and then shook their heads. Aunt said, We met at Gringotts, and since he's the only one whose name I know, I asked him if we should find a seat so we don't have to sit all alone. One makes their friends on the train, Harry said with a smile. Not true, both Luna and Neville said. Harry just shrugged, but actually, Luna and Neville were quite right. Tell us more about the teachers in the school, Cole said, eager to know as much as possible before faced with it.
Well, you have to watch out for Snape. He's the potions master and the head of Slytherin house. He doesn't like students not in his house. You have to look out for him. He's horrible, Neville said. Professor Spratt teaches herbology. He's really nice.
Neville summed up all the teachers for the 2 first years and then told them a bit about Dumbledore, and lastly,
Well, I'm a new defense against the dark arts teacher and a new history teacher. Both of them quit last year. I won't miss Umbridge, but the history teacher was pretty cool.
Neville went silent and looked at the door. Harry and Luna did the same thing. They all owed their lives to him. Just before lunch, Ron and Hermione entered the compartment. They both stopped dead as they noticed that there was only one seat left and that 2 strangers were sitting in the compartment. Harry took charge of the introductions quickly. Hermione, Ron, these are Aunt and Cole. Aunt, Cole, these are Ron and Hermione. Cole lifted June from the seat and she glared at him, annoyed. Cole moved closer to the wall and Aunt moved closer to Cole. Luna moved closer to the window and created an additional seat. Ron sat down next to Harry and Hermione sat down between Aunt and Luna. Ron enthusiastically explained Quidditch to the two, but it was pretty clear that it was Aunt who was interested most by the sport. Hermione briefly informed Harry about Malfoy's whereabouts and doings when a third-year girl delivered some invitations by Professor H.E.F. Slughorn to Neville and Harry. And so they went, "First years, follow me! First years, over here, first years!" A man with a hairy face swinging around a large lantern was calling out to them. Aunt gave Cole a look, and then they made their way over to the man resembling something of a giant. "And no more first years, follow me!" It didn't take long until they, slipping and stumbling in the dark, reached a large black lake. At the other side, on a hilltop, one could see a large castle. "That, my friends, is Hogwarts," the man said, and made a sweeping gesture with his lantern. "Far in a boat, no more." Cole and Aunt carefully made their way over to the boats. Being the last two left on the shore, they had the last boat all to themselves. It was quite a struggle for Cole to get June in the boat, but after a while he succeeded with some help of Aunt, who muttered something about monster cat. Cole held his Bengal tightly to keep her from jumping back on shore. "Everyone in?" the large man asked, and looked around to make sure no one was left standing on the shore. "Right, forward!" And the boats left the shore simultaneously, without being directed by any visible means. Magic, Cole decided. It looked as if the boats would crash into the cliff, but then the man with a boat of his own yelled, "Aids down!" The first boats disappeared into the cliff. It was when Cole and Aunt reached the cliff that they realized that the boats sailed through a wall of ivy, hiding an opening. The boats kept moving through the pitch-black tunnel until they reached an underground harbor. They climbed out of the boats under the supervision of the man whom Cole assumed to be Hagrid, according to what Neville had told him. June was the first one out, but as soon as Cole stood on the rock, she jumped up onto his shoulder. The first years followed him up a long flight of stairs, and next to him, at the end of the line, Cole heard Aunt mutter, "Stupid stairs! I want to find the man who invented stairs and throw him down these stairs to show him how stupid stairs are. He'll break his legs and end up in a wheelchair. Then his wife will leave him to be with that man who invented the elevator because everyone knows that stairs are stupid, and oh god, I'm nowhere near the top yet." Cole just stared at Aunt, the reminder of the walk up the stairs. The fact was, Aunt hardly seemed annoyed by the stairs. He must have said it just to say it. The shorter was oblivious to Cole's staring, but when they reached the top of the stairs, he turned to look at the dumbfounded Cole. "What?" he asked with a amused smile. Cole just shook his head as Hagrid knocked 3 times on the castle doors. It was Professor McGonagall who opened the door. "Thank you, Hagrid," she said sternly. "I'll take care of them for now." Cole couldn't help but think it sounded slightly like a threat. She welcomed them and informed them briefly that they would be sorted into houses and about the point system. Then she left them, telling them that she would be back shortly when they were ready for them. She was away just long enough for them to start worrying about what was going to happen. All the students looked terrified with the exception for Anne, who seemed to lack the emotion of fear overall. Then McGonagall entered, welcoming them into the place which she called the Great Hall. Cole forgot all about the staring students when he noticed the ceiling, or a lack thereof. A starry, clear night sky met his eyes. Then he recalled it had been cloudy when they had traveled with the boats, so why wasn't it now? The clouds couldn't have disappeared that fast. McGonagall pulled an old, dirty hat on a 4-legged stool in front of the first years so that the entire school could see it. Cole was starting to like this less and less. June seemed to agree and jumped down from his shoulder. Then the hat moved, and Cole resisted the urge to take a step back, wishing he wasn't such a coward. When it started to sing, though, Cole forgot to be afraid. When the hat finished singing about unison, persistence, and hope, everyone clapped, but for some reason the applause was subdued. There was no denying that the hat's message had been gloomy. Aunt and Cole exchanged a glance. There was something most definitely wrong in the wizarding world. McGonagall stepped forward with a long roll of parchment in her hands. "When I call your name, you will put on the hat and sit on the stool to be sorted. Then you can join your house at the house table." She looked at the parchment. "Alato Alice." A short girl with pale red hair and a puffy face sat down on the chair. The hat didn't take long. "Hufflepuff!" it shouted. "Blast Heather!" McGonagall said with loud voice. An unusual tall and slender girl with long blonde hair sat down gracefully. There was something exceptionally kind over her. "Hufflepuff!" the hat shouted after much debating. "Berculus Zantorio!" McGonagall said, and her stern tone only made the name sound more amusing. "Is that even a name? Cole asked, holding back his laughter. Ant did, however, not laugh at all. He glared at Cole before stepping out of the line and walking towards the stool. Before lifting the hat and sitting down, he turned to face the students in the great hall. Ant! For those who want to know, Cole went bright red. Ant lifted the hat, sat down, he put the hat on his head, and it didn't even take a second. Gryffindor! The hat yelled. With his head held high and his back straight, he walked towards the Gryffindor table, where he was welcomed warmly, being called Ants. Clancy Cole, McGonagall said, and Cole hesitatingly stepped out of the line and walked towards the hat. When it disappeared over his eyes, he could hear a small, deep voice in his head. This would be a problem. A clear lack of overall courage. Don't remind me, Cole thought in a rather dry reply. The hat didn't bother about him. It's all in your head. Yes, you are most definitely a... Then the hat went quiet. It was almost as if it shivered, but the sensation disappeared quickly. Ravenclaw! The Ravenclaw table burst out into loud applause as they recruited the first students that evening. Cole paid attention to the sorting, but didn't really register it all the same. There was a lot to take in. He went to sit next to the girl with whom he had traveled with. She was sitting relatively removed from the other Ravenclaws, together with a brown-haired, freckled boy who was looking... not depressed, perhaps, but his expression spoke of sorrow. Cole, this is Peter, Luna said. The two males shook hands, and then Cole sat down. He waved to Ant, who with a laugh waved back. Recalling the hat's words, Cole knew that it under no circumstances needed to mean that they could not be friends just because they were in different houses. They seemed to have a pretty merry time at the Gryffindor table, and the Hufflepuff table also seemed to have a very enjoyable spear over it. The Ravenclaws were more subdued, although even there, friendly conversations had started as the feast appeared. Neither Luna, Peter, nor Cole spoke. It was the mood at the Slytherin table which stood out. It was simply gloomy. There was no happy chattering, stupid jokes, or roaring laughter. It was almost silent. There was, however, one figure which stood out. It was a girl going either 5th or 6th year. Her hair was long and dark, just as her eyes. She was sitting completely isolated from the rest of the Slytherins, as if they shunned her. That's Tracy, Peter said suddenly, following Cole's gaze. She's not as alone as she appears there. She just has her friends in other houses. The Slytherins see her as a traitor, thus they have kind of thrown her out. Is it bad to have friends in other houses? Cole asked, thinking about Ant. Depends on who you ask. I don't think it is. I think it's a really good thing. I have friends in Gryffindor and Slytherin. Tracy, that is. It's just that most Slytherins mind it. The rest of the houses get along pretty well. Just remember that Slytherin and Gryffindor are, per definition, enemies. Tracy broke that rule, so the Slytherins threw her out. What did she do? Cole asked. She fell in love with a Gryffindor. Dean Thomas, actually. Peter answered. The Gryffindors accepted it when they got to know Tracy, but the Slytherins abused her, sending her to the hospital wing. Is that the only reason to why they isolate her? Cole wondered, incredulous. He thought they overreacted. Peter shook his head. No, she's a werewolf, and there is a lot of prejudice against them. In fact, it doesn't really matter. Cole chose to disregard the werewolf thing for a while. He'd acknowledged things like that when he started to comprehend the ceiling and the ghosts no sooner, or he'd go insane. Cole didn't eat too much, far too fascinated by the way the food appeared and everything else around him. After a while, he built up the courage to ask Luna about the ceiling. She explained to him that the ceiling was enchanted, and that if the spell would be removed, an absolute normal ceiling would appear. Then the doors opened and a figure, obviously keen on not being seen, made his way to the Gryffindor table. A loud fuzz erupted, and some people even stood up to see who it was. Cole recognized the figure as Harry, but had no idea why people made such a big deal out of it. He supposed that it was part of the things they were not telling him. At the Slytherin table, people suddenly started to laugh loudly, and Cole could see that Tracy grimaced. Whatever they found funny, she did not. When the headmaster stood up, all the noise in the hall died away. The man spread his arms as if he would embrace them all at the same time. Cole didn't even notice the hand until a second ear a little bit away pointed at it. Nothing to worry about, Dumbledore said quietly, and shook his sleeve over the black thing which had to pass as his hand. Now, to our new students, welcome. To our old students, welcome back. He gave a short speech mentioning Quidditch and a request of the caretaker about products from a shop named Weasley's Wizard Wheezes. Cole remembered the shop, and although he hadn't entered it, it had been the only color left in Diagon Alley. We are pleased to welcome 2 new members of staff this year. Professor Slughorn stood up, his bald head gleaming in the candlelight, his big waistcoated belly casting the table into shadow. Is a former colleague of mine who has agreed to resume his old post of potions master. Clearly, for a reason unbeknown to Cole, that was big news. The crowd repeated the word potions several times with an air of disbelief coating it. Dumbledore ignored them. Instead, he just raised his voice so he could be heard over the murmuring of the students. Meanwhile, Professor Snape will be taking the position of defense against the dark arts teacher. The Slytherins started to cheer, but many protests came from the rest of the hall. The man with the greasy hair, which Cole assumed it to be Snape, just raised a hand, acknowledging the support from his house. Then we will welcome Professor Magician, who will be teaching history of magic from now on. The entire hall went dead silent. Cole had no idea why, but next to him he heard a sharp intake of breath from Peter. Professor Magician stood up like Professor Slughorn had and looked around with an examining look in his grey-blue eyes. There was something not quite natural over the man with creamy white robes and long brown hair, partly covered by his robes. His bare arms were muscular and his tanned face was youthful. He couldn't have reached 30 yet. Not a single reaction came from the crowd on the appearance of the new history teacher. Cole was obviously missing something. What's the big deal? Cole asked Peter eventually. It's not his fault, Peter said, and made a gesture towards the new history teacher, who had sat down, looking oddly amused at the lack of reaction. It's just that our previous teacher in that subject was something out of the ordinary, and no one knows what to expect now. Peter refused to say anything more. But Cole had the annoying feeling that people were increasing the amount of secrets at Hogwarts rather than decreasing them. Then finally someone told him something he had been trying to figure out ever since he had set foot in Diagon Alley. Now, as everybody in this hall knows, Lord Voldemort and his followers are once more at large and gaining in strength. The silence thickened. The atmosphere could almost be touched. Who's Lord Voldemort? Cole asked quickly when Dumbledore paused to let the words sink in. They didn't listen to the rest, where Dumbledore told them about the new security measures and the importance of following rules at those dangerous times. Instead, Luna, Peter, and several other Ravenclaws informed those who did not know about Voldemort. A glance at the Gryffindor table showed that Aunt had asked the same question. It was so that Cole learned about the First War and the end of it, about Harry and everything around it. Then Dumbledore stopped. He closed his eyes a couple of moments before sweeping them over all of them. I could hold a long speech about past events, but I will not. Last year, I was scolded by a teacher, and the words that student spoke were undeniably true. I told her that perhaps I should let her speak at the opening feast to get through to you. I have decided she should. Who wanted to answer the questions I know you have been haunting a selected few here with? A wave of surprise went through the hall. No one scolded the headmaster. The teachers were just as surprised as the students. You should have asked me first, a female voice said before a pale white figure entered through the floor. What if I refuse? Dumbledore smiled at the transparent girl standing next to him. You have never minded sharing your opinion. Fine, she hissed, and in that moment Cole recognized her. The dead girl was none other than Rebecca Hawkins. He had seen her alive just a couple of months ago. How could she be dead? Clearly he wasn't the only one who wanted to know that. Rebecca Hawkins! Cole called out, astounded, just before several voices cried out, Rebecca! Cole looked at the boy next to him, who was started crying. He, too, had called out her name. So had the Slytherin girl, Tracy, and a red-haired girl at the Gryffindor table. You know her? Peter and Cole asked each other simultaneously. Every duelist knows who Rebecca Hawkins is, Cole whispered. Did she go to school here? Is that why she suddenly disappeared? She came here last year. She died just before the summer started, Peter said before wiping his eyes. She was my best friend, although we did not part on the best of terms. Rebecca spoke up, silencing the entire hall. The questions you have, eh? What happened in the Department of Mysteries? How did I die? Why did the Prophet deny Voldemort's return? Professor Muto's part in it all? Is Harry Potter really the chosen one? Even the ghosts have been asking these questions. Professor Muto? Cole asked, turning to Luna, who was the only one he could talk to who was not crying. As in Yugi Muto? The king of games? Luna just nodded, her bulging eyes transfixed on the ghost of the girl who once was her friend. Cole realized he had to ask more later. He wouldn't receive any decent reply at the moment anyway. Instead, he listened to the dead girl's speech. There is only one question. Does it matter? Does it matter what happened in the Ministry of Magic? Does it matter why the Ministry is a corrupt gathering of people who won't hold stand against Voldemort much longer? Does it matter what Professor Muto's part was in this? Does it even matter if Harry Potter is or isn't the chosen one? Rebecca sounded a lot calmer than she had when he had met her for the first time on the streets of London. No, in the end it does not. We stand where we stand, and that is unfortunately divided. Voldemort has returned. We all know it. All of us also know that people are dying as we speak. 2 students have died since Voldemort's return, and there will be more as long as there are people loyal to him who agree on his values. It's a harsh truth, but you better accept it. Not all of us will survive. Cedric Diggory didn't. I didn't. And there will be others among you who can say the same thing when this all is over. This is the current situation, and that's all that matters. She took a short breath for the words to settle in. Another harsh truth is that there are students here who would gladly follow Voldemort, just as there are students here who would rather die than live in a world controlled by him. This inevitably means that there will be students killing other students. Imagine that the students you are feasting with today could be your murderer tomorrow, or that you'd kill someone in this very room on command by someone with twisted values. Many people started to cry, students and teachers alike. Professor Magician, though, just looked with interest at Rebecca and seemed completely distanced from the things she said. I won't tell you what happened at the Ministry of Magic. It does not matter. Neither will I tell you Professor Muto's involvement in what happened there, or anything else about him. He is gone and not intent on coming back. Thus it does not matter. You all already know how I died. I got killed by a Death Eater. End of story. Many of you will be killed in that very same way. It's unavoidable. I'm not going to pretend everything is okay. I'm telling you the truth and giving you an advice you should cherish. In times like these, death is closer than ever. Live your life to the fullest. No fear. Once again, she waited for the words to sink in as Hagrid dried his tears with a tablecloth. A girl at the Ravenclaw table was crying too, crying a lot. But people became absolutely silent at that word of advice. They closed their eyes, and it was almost as if the advice was handed out as small golden spheres, one each, and people closed their hands around it and brought it to their hearts, where they allowed their skin to consume it. Cole could almost feel it. I'm not done, Rebecca said, breaking the spell. Is or isn't Harry Potter the chosen one? That does matter, not even I can deny it. She looks Harry straight in the eyes. But at the same time, it doesn't. If he is the so-called chosen one, then it matters to him only and perhaps those closest to him. It should not affect your choices. If he is, then it's up to him to act on that. The rest of us can choose to fight on one side or the other regardless of that. To us, it does not matter. If he is the chosen one, then I wish him all the luck he can get. But if he's not, then I would personally have tried to get rid of Voldemort. It matters not what he can do. It matters what we can do. Each of us as an individual. I chose. I fight. Another moment of silence where most people had abandoned their tears or were looking at her in utter shock. Cole turned to look at Harry. He looked shocked too, but also immeasurably grateful. Lastly, no, I didn't scold Professor Dumbledore, she said with a smile. I scolded Professor Snape. When Tracy ended up in the hospital when her parents asked Fred and George Weasley why they would take care of her, although she wasn't in their house. They answered that it didn't matter in which house one was. Rebecca flew forward and kept going towards the door of the Great Hall. Ever since I came here, it's been all this whining about these houses. Which house will win the Quidditch Cup and the House Cup? Slytherins being sworn enemies of Gryffindors, inaccessible common rooms, you name it. Then 4 loud bangs could be heard coming from the entrance hall. Rebecca turned and made her way back to the podium again. She did not bother about them until Filch ran down the alleyway and opened the double doors. Psychology has never been taught at the school, and that's fairly obvious if one looks around. The Sorting Hat spoke of standing united in the face of our enemy. He is asking for the impossible. Then Filch came running back in again. The hourglasses have been destroyed. They are all completely annihilated. The doors were still standing wide open, and on the floor one could see rubies, sapphires, emeralds, and other yellow gems which Cole didn't recognize. Clearly this was enough evidence for a wave of whispers went through the students. Then the banners hanging above each table in different colors caught fire. Rebecca still took no notice. Assemble a group of strangers. Let them be for half an hour and let them mingle. They'll be nice to each other, mingle, talk. Put down 2 boxes with shirts. One with yellow, one with purple, and tell everyone to put on a shirt from one of these boxes. People will automatically divide into 2 groups. Here, people have been divided into 4 groups, designed in such a way that it makes it nearly impossible to cross these borders. This school can never be called for one united school as long as the houses exist. My advice, she said and looked at Dumbledore challenging. To hell with the houses! Cole knew she was right. Would there have been no houses, he would have been sitting with Aunt right now. Everyone would be sitting differently. He heard a Ravenclaw a little further down the table say, "She's a ghost! She should not be able to blow up the hourglasses or burn the banners!" He sounded scared. Dumbledore stepped forward. "I hope you take what you have heard today in close consideration. But now, your beds will wait as warm and comfortable as you could possibly wish, and I know that your top priority is to be well rested for your lessons tomorrow. Let us therefore say good night. Pip pip." There was a deafening noise of people standing up and leaving the great hall. He followed the voice saying, "Ravenclaws, follow me!" And like Dumbledore had told them to, he took her words into close consideration. Tomorrow morning, he would have breakfast with Aunt.